Good day everyone! I am Eduardo Gabus from Bsed Social Studies 3. So I and my group mates were going to discuss about the transnational urban experience. So sit back and learn from us. Transnational, extending or operating across national boundaries. So transnationals are individuals who participate in flows and movement of people, ideas, capital, and goods between regions. In other words, transnational have regular ongoing contact with others across national boundaries. These contacts can be in the physical or digital realms. Some transnational challenges including terrorism, criminal networks, and piracy are long-standing and familiar. But there are also a number of transnational challenges such as water stress, human trafficking, and smuggling that are increasingly being cited as having a direct link to US national security. Urbanism. It is the study of how inhabitants of human areas such as towns and cities interact with the built environment. It is a direct component of disciplines such as urban planning, which is the profession focusing on the physical design and management of urban structures, and urban sociology, which the academic field, the study of urban life and culture. So many architects, planners, geographers, and sociologists investigate the way people live in densely populated urban areas. There is a wide variety of different theories and approaches to the study of urbanism. Unfortunately, the built environment is often focused on roads, parking structures, and places for cars versus the inhabitants of the vehicles, often resulting in urban sprawl. Transnational urbanism. The concept of transnational urbanism refers to the socio-cultural and political processes by which social structures forge connections between localities and across national borders that increasingly sustain new modes of politics, economics, and culture. So transnational urbanism, it is a term that describes the socio-cultural and political processes through which social actors connect locations across international boundaries in order to sustain more contemporary forms of politics, economy, and culture. So, focusing on the Philippines, a nation whose lifeblood is intimately entangled with its overseas citizens and despotic population. The community is removed from the plans concerning living spaces, and the objective is no longer about how to build a stronger relationship within society. So the community is no longer considered in the planning or housing, or the goal is no longer to forge closer ties throughout society. Improving quality of life in cities is becoming an increasingly critical issue for urban planning. The rise of urban populations worldwide caused by rapid population growth and urbanization processes. It makes urban quality of life relevant to more and more people. Transnational urbanism. It is a profound work of theoretical synthesis by internationally renowned urban theorists by Michael Peter Smith. Moving deeply across disciplines and discovers terrains, Smith forged original and stimulating connections between urban studies and the emerging field of transnational studies. With original and extraordinary insight, he addresses the central question of how and why immigrants, refugees, political activists, and institutions locate and maintain social relations in light of transnational urbanism. Importance of transnational urbanism. Transnational urbanism, it is a viewpoint through which social actors can conceptualize the emerging transnational behaviors that connect them to the socio-economic opportunities, political institutions, and cultural practices of urban environments. So transnational cities are the key of cross-border migrant networks, in part because cities are concentrated sources of employment for transnational migrants. They offer the means for migrants to deploy remittances to families that remain behind in their communities of origin.
Next one is the monetary policy. So monetary policy is the control of the quantity of money available in an economy and the channels by which new money is supplied. So economic statistics such as gross domestic product or the GDP, the rate of inflation, and industry and sector specific growth rates influence monetary policy strategy. So by managing the money supply, a central bank aims to influence macroeconomic factors including inflation, the rate of consumption, economic growth, and overall liquidity. So monetary supply is the economic policy laid down by the central bank. It involves management of the money supply and interest rate, and is the demand side of economic policy used by the government of a country to achieve a macroeconomic objectives like inflation, which refers to a general increase in the prices of goods and services in an economy, consumption, which is the act of using resources to satisfy current needs and wants. Economic growth is an increase in the amount of goods and services produced per head of the population over period of time, and liquidity is a company's ability to convert assets to cash or acquire cash through a loan or money in the bank to pay its short-term obligations or liabilities. Monetary policy impacts the money supply in an economy. With monetary supply, a central bank increases or decreases the amount of currency or credit in circulation. When a central bank is looking to increase the quantity of money in circulation, it purchases government securities from commercial banks and institutions. This frees up bank assets. They now have more cash to loan. Central banks do this sort of spending as part of an expansionary or easy monetary policy, which brings down the interest rate in an economy. So an advantage of monetary policy over fiscal policy is the decisions are made by experts in finance, banking, and monetary policy, not politicians. The decision makers are independent of political pressures the time it takes monetary policy to have an effect in an economy once enacted. Expansionary monetary policy can have limited effects on growth by increasing assets prices and lowering the cost of borrowing, making companies more profitable. Monetary policy seeks to spark economic activity, while fiscal policy seeks to address either total spending, the total composition of spending, or both.
One of the major disadvantages of monetary policy is the loan-making link through which it is carried out. If economic conditions are severe, no expansion of reserves or lowering of the interest rate may be enough to induce borrowers to take loans. A second problem with monetary policy occurs during inflation. So risked hyperinflation or hyperinflation describes an excessive increase in the prices of goods in an economy. If banks use monetary policy to set interest prices at a low price, individuals and businesses may borrow excessively, increase demand, and inflate prices unreasonably. Making more money available in the economy through the sale of treasury bills may also undervalue certain products. This means that If the bank set interest prices at a low rate, many people will always borrow money. The prices will increase and will cause inflation, which means that you have lots of money but you can't buy anything that you want because the prices are high. International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, is an organization of 190 countries working to foster global monetary cooperation, secure financial stability, facilitate international trade, promote high employment and sustainable economic growth, and reduce poverty around the world. The 7 countries out of a total of 196 countries that are not IMF members are Cuba, East Timor, North Korea, Liechtenstein, Monaco, Taiwan, and Vatican City. The IMF has 3 critical missions: furthering international monetary cooperation, encouraging the expansion of trade and economic growth, and discouraging policies that would harm prosperity. Through surveillance and capacity building activities, as well as concessional financial support to help them achieve, maintain, or restore a stable and sustainable position consistent with strong and durable poverty reduction and growth. So the IMF supports countries around the world by providing policy advice and technical assistance. Monetary policy. A key role of central banks is to conduct monetary policy to achieve prices stability, low and stable inflation, and to help manage economic fluctuations.
Now, let us proceed to the next slide, which is low inflation contributes towards economic stability, which encourages saving, investment, economic growth, and helps maintain international competitiveness. Governments usually target an inflation rate of around 2%. This moderate but low rate of inflation is considered the best compromise between avoiding the costs of inflation but also avoiding the costs of deflation when prices fall. Low, stable, and predictable inflation is good for the economy and for your finances. It helps money keep its value and makes it easier for everyone to plan how, where, and when they spend. For example, companies are more likely to grow their business when they know that their costs will be in the years ahead. But there are some negative effects of low inflation, especially when it is not predictable, because it can be a signal of economic problems, because it may be associated with weakness in the economy. When unemployment is high or consumer confidence low, people and businesses may be less willing to make investments and spend on consumptions, and this lower demand keeps them from bidding up prices. Inflation is an increase in the general prices of the goods and services in an economy. I know that you are familiar with that. So according to the World Data Info for 2021, an inflation rate for 3.9% was calculated in the Philippines. During the observation period from 1960 to 2021, the average inflation rate was 8.5% per year. So overall, the price increase was 12,625.67%. An item that cost 100 pesos in 1960 costs 12,725.67 pesos at the beginning of 2022. Deflation, conversely, is the general decline in prices for goods and services, indicating by an inflation rate that falls below 0%. Deflation is the exact opposite of inflation. In this condition, the price levels of goods and services decrease exponentially, which results in an increase of buying power of the money. In other words, in case of deflation, the people in an economy are able to purchase more quantities of products with limited amounts of money. How to achieve low inflation? First is monetary policy. If inflation is rising above target, the central bank can raise interest rates. Higher interest rates raise the cost of borrowing, reduce lending, and consumer spending. This moderates economic growth and reduces inflationary pressure. So monetary policy refers to the steps taken by the country's central bank to control money supply for economic stability. For example, policymakers manipulate money circulation for increasing employment, GDP, price stability by using tools such as interest rates, reserves, bonds, and etc. Contractionary monetary policy is now more popular method of controlling inflation. The goal of a contractionary policy is to reduce the money supply within an economy by increasing interest rates. This helps slow economic growth by making credit more expensive, which reduces consumer and business spending.
How to achieve low inflation? Supply-side policies, productivity growth. In long term, some inflationary pressures can be reduced by supply-side policies. So, for example, we have in the 1970s, powerful trade unions were blamed for being able to increase wages, leading to wage pull inflation. With weaker unions, wage growth has been lower and inflation weaker. Supply-side policies entail attempts by the government to boost economic activity to keep the economy functioning optimal. So, the arguments regarding their inadequacy to overcome a recession support the idea that these frameworks can only work in the short to medium term and that their effects are weak. So, these sentiments have been presented by Socsci et al. 2019, whose focus has been the relationship between these what we call the intervention and the characteristic of the labor market. So, these researchers explain that the supply-side policies intended to reduce unemployment are not independent of the labor market conditions. So, the question that remains, therefore, is whether these policies alone can be relied on during severe downturns, especially when in structurally weak labor markets. So, the expected outcomes of measures intended to boost labor, for example, increasing employment will go up, and increasing training programs and helping people with job researches is that employment will go up and the national income will follow. So additionally, the availability of labor means more productivity of the markets and the incomes can boost the aggregate demand. So with this cycle, the decline in economic activity, which is the major event in a recession, is reversed, at least in theory. So these are the examples of supply-side policies. So supply-side policies in the free market oriented, so we have privatization. So they sell state-owned assets to private sector to improve incentives. So the second is the regulation. So it allows new firms to enter market or open monopolies to competition. And the next one is the income tax cuts. So greater incentives to work longer hours. And the next one would be remove regulations or the red tape. So it make it easier to build new factories and housing. And the next one would be flexible labor markets. And then it reduces power of trade unions, mean wages and regulations. And then the free trade agreements, it reduces tariff barriers and other obstacles to trade. And the next one would be reduce welfare benefits. So it increases incentives to get a job. And the next one would be interventionist. So in interventionist, we have public sector investment. So in infrastructure. So it improves transport and reduce cost. And the next one would be education. it increases funding to schools and universities to improve labor productivity. And the next one would be vocational training. So the government schemes to provide new skills to those who lose jobs. So the next one would be housing supply. It increases supply of council housing, improves geographical mobility. And the next one would be the health spending. The public spending on health can reduce hours lost to ill health. So the next one would be how to achieve low inflation is that low commodity prices. So some inflationary pressures are beyond the scope of central. And then the next one would be the bank or the government. The rising oil prices almost inevitably causes cost push inflation, and this is difficult to solve. So in low commodity prices, so actually we can reduce inflation if we have low commodity prices. So however, we cannot deny the fact that there are things that the government cannot control, just like the what we call the increase in the oil prices. So have you noticed the war between Ukraine and Russia? So we can actually relate to that situation. So that war affects the increase in oil prices since Ukraine is one of the largest producer of oil. The next one on how to achieve low inflation is that the control money supply. So monetarists place emphasis on controlling the money supply as they see a direct link between the growth of money supply and inflation. The next one would be the fiscal policy. So if inflation is high, the government can moderate inflationary pressures through tight fiscal policy. So example, we have higher income tax will reduce consumer spending. So fiscal policy is really used to reduce inflation. So in control money supply, we all know that we cannot just print more money to address the problem in inflation. Instead, it will make it worse because there will be no balance between the supply and demand. If lots of people can buy that product, so the supply dili siya kaapas. So there's a need to control the money we make. So in fiscal policy, so fiscal policy refers to the use of government spending and tax policies to influence economic conditions, especially macroeconomic conditions. So these include aggregate demand for goods and services, and then the employment and inflation and economic growth. So during a recession, so the government may lower tax rates or increase spending to encourage demand and spark economic activity. So conversely, to combat inflation, it may raise rates or cut spending to cool down the economy. So the fiscal policy is often contrasted with monetary policy, which is enacted by the central bankers and not elected government officials. That's all for our report, and thank you for watching.